Yeah, first off, I'd like to ask Terry, because Terry, we know his present role, we also know his past roles with the City of Dublin. If you might develop a little bit some of this idea that you and I have talked with about a couple of times regarding the changes in the population, changes in trends, and how you see and saw as your position with Dublin, what those impacts would be.
I'd be happy to. When I joined Dublin in 2008, back as city manager, I had been as development director from 1990 to 96, and what we did was kind of look back at Dublin. We looked at Dublin over its previous 40 years, from 2010 back to 1970. It had grown, it was 600 people in 1870. It was over 40,000 in 2010. It's a mammoth growth. And as we tried to start to look at what's Dublin's next 10, 20, 30, 40 years going to be driven by, we took a very close look at this demographic issue. And I think the one article that I shared with Ken here that probably hit me more than any other was there's a demographer at the University of Southern California. His name is Dow Evans, who's really looked at the impact of the baby boom housing push on the bubble that's been created. And that's what built Dublin over the last 40 years. It was that folks like me who bought those homes in Dublin. It's also full of folks like me, increasingly, whose kids have moved out and still have a 4-bedroom home in Dublin. But the statistic, the graph that I remember that just stuck out to me, had a graph showing, remind us, 2010, the first baby boomers happened, getting to retirement. You've got from 1945, 2010, the first one becomes 65 and enters a retirement. And they looked at the statistics across the states, country, and basically showed, depending by state, and I'm sure this is going to change, subject to change, but folks 65 and older were effectively net sellers of homes. Folks from 22 to 65 were net buyers of homes. And they showed the demographics from 2010 to 220 to 220 to 230. If you look back at each of the last 4 decades, the growth in the 25 and over population, 75% of the growth that occurred each subsequent 10 years was in that 25 to 65-year-old range. That's the bubble that built all the housing demand that I think occurred in the last, that built the kind of suburbs that Dublin is. If you started looking at that 2010, 2020, it flipped. 75% growth that occurred in that 22 and older range was in the 65 and older population. And it even gets higher than that, 2020 to 230. So the increase in numbers of sellers of homes since, I think, 85% of all home sales are of existing home product. So changing the nature of the market on a going forward basis. And I think ULI and others have done analysis on this on the housing side. It's going to be a radically different game. And this doesn't necessarily mean the next year or 2 or 3, but as you're looking, as planners try to do out 10, 20, 30 years, it's going to be, we think, a radically different environment. So with that change occurring, with people getting married, having kids less, with the desires and changes of kind of young professionals in terms of kind of housing they're looking for being different, energy prices, gasoline prices doing what they're doing. We're used to kind of drive to the edge to qualify for housing prices. I think Dublin concluded that it made a lot more sense to focus on a new model, which was a much denser, probably more urban, mixed-use core to accommodate the kind of folks that had been able to accommodate, which would give it a much broader range of housing prices. If you think of the young workers that are at the OCLCs, the Cardinal Healths, and others who are seeking different kind of product, and folks like myself who, as we want to get rid of the 4-bedroom suburban home, might want something that's much more walkable and different type of housing altogether, that those markets will increasingly be the larger ones of growth in the coming years. Not that there won't be any of the other time, but its predominance, like it was in the last 4 years, are going to be radically different. So I think all those forces together got Dublin to conclude its next 20, 30, 40 years are going to be driven by totally different forces, not the least of which is this demographic